part 2 of how to answer the poetry question. So just to remind you that this is from the Duffy collection. So last lesson we had a look at how you interpret and deconstruct a question. We looked at how to use the poem and how to analyse in time conditions. We also annotated for a range of techniques. We brainstormed different ideas and then made a detailed plan. So we're now up to the stage where we're ready to write up the essay. So here is just to refresh your memory on the different assessment objectives, and just so you can see how we're going to transform what we've done in terms of the plan into an essay, and going to be looking at presenting your ideas but also showing that you can do all of these things within an essay. Here is just the mark scheme so you can remind yourself what it looks like, and if we just have a look at level 6. So demonstrates knowledge by supporting with careful and relevant reference to the text. So remember that whatever quotations you pick must match the particular point that you are trying to prove. Shows a clear understanding of the poem and its deeper implications. So this is where you are inferring meaning and you're developing your own interpretation to show that you've got a personal response. Develop response to the way the writer achieves his or her effects. So this is where you comment on the techniques, the devices, the language, and the effect of those you're analysing in depth. Makes a well-developed, detailed, and relevant personal response. Well-developed, so we're going to have, for my example, 3 PO paragraphs that show an array of different points. So you don't just want to have one point in response to the question, you want it to be developed. So my essay will be developed through 3 different points. They'll be detailed because I'm talking about using more than one quotation, and have a relevant personal response. Your point is your personal response, and then how you use quotations and analyse them in terms of your point, and that again is your own personal response. So just to remind you that this is the plan that I made last lesson, and this is what I'm going to be using today. So what we are going to do is just have a look at the beginning of an essay, just a small extract, and we're going to be just looking at this beginning section. So you've got an idea of how all of this can then turn into an essay. So this is your essay structure. You don't have to follow this again, this is just my suggestion. So in your introduction, give a brief overview of what the poem's about. This should be quite easy because you've already got your notes with regards to this. Don't forget to use the keyword in the question. You want to show the examiner that you're relevant right from the very first few sentences. Give an overview of what you may talk about, your keywords from your main ideas. Think about what you're trying to prove. What's your idea here? Use the poet's name, and you could also identify form here. A lot of pupils do find it difficult to embed form within their essay, and if you're one of those, then you can include form in your introduction, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Then you've got a range of different points. For my example, there are 3 points. You will know whether you can do more or whether it's better for you to just focus on 2. Everybody is completely different when it comes to this exam. So always try and stretch and challenge yourself, but also don't try and push yourself too far too quickly. And if you have time, you can do a few sentences of a conclusion. So just a very, very short overview. What have you proven in response to the question? What have you learned from the poem? Try and link back to the keyword in the question and link back to the message of the poem in response to the keyword in the question. So very, very short. Your introduction and your conclusion will not be as detailed or developed as your PO points here. And don't worry, that's expected. Okay, you only have 45 minutes to do this. So just an overview here, the structure of each point. So I've just gone through your what, your how and your why. And if you do want to look at that in detail, please pause the video now. I'm not going to go through it all at this moment, but it could be useful for you in terms of thinking how each PO develops and how you make it quite detailed. I also have a paragraph pyramid here that might help you. So you want to repeat this 3 times. So you start at the point of your pyramid. So the top here is your point. Everything filters down from your point. Your point is your answer to the question. What do you see? What is shown? What do you understand? What's your point in relation to the question? Then you've got your evidence. So which examples back up your point? So I've just kind of structured it in terms of how you can layer your response here. So how you can layer it in terms of you say one thing about quotation 1, and then you say the second thing about quotation 1, and then you can have quotation 2 here. And then you can develop it even further by trying to discuss the poet intention and the effect on the reader. Now, this does not have to come at the end of the paragraph, and in fact you may decide that there are more appropriate points to put this throughout the paragraph. So you may decide to talk about the effect on the reader at multiple points, or you may decide to link back to Duffy's intention at multiple points. So it doesn't have to come at the end, and instead it can just be peppered throughout. So in terms of your first response to your evidence, so think about what your evidence shows, how is it shown, try and interpret the meaning in a personal way, and I've given you some words and phrases to help you to develop your interpretation. This suggests, this implies. Then you want to develop your second response, so layer your analysis and double up. So like I said, always start with your strongest technique in your strongest quotation in your appeal. Say as much as you can, try and say 2 things. And then you can move to your second strongest quotation and try and say a minimum of 1 thing about it, but you could replicate this and say 2. I've also got the slide here just to help you. I use it quite often with my own classes just to remind them how to analyse language, but also how to analyse technique, because quite often you can find yourself, it's quite tense in an exam scenario, and you can say, okay, a simile is used, but then you're not quite sure what else to say. So you can just go through the different questions. So what technique? Simile. Why is it used? Well, it emphasises whatever you think it emphasises. What's the effect on the reader? What kind of language is used? So even if you're analysing a simile, you can then take it further and you can zoom in on word choice and you can talk about the effect of that. What are the connotations of the word that you decide to zoom in on? And how do word choice and the technique work together overall in that one line? And I've done the same thing over here for you in terms of language. Okay, so here's just a link to what, how and why, but with a specific example from the poem. So you want to always remember what, how, why, and this really helps you with the structure of your points and your essay as a whole. So what do you know? What do you see? What is presented to you? Well, this idea of maternal love is what I see. This is what's presented to me. So what quotation shows that? Well, here it is. I stood at the edge of my child's sleep. So then you ask yourself, well, how is this idea of maternal love presented to me? How is it presented? Well, it's presented to me through a metaphor. And then you go further and you ask yourself, well, why? Why is it presented to me through a metaphor? Why is this idea of edge used? And then I've got some questions here, and I've kept the questions general so that you can then apply them to any technique when you if you maybe want to do this activity again by yourself with a different poem. So in order to develop your response, you've got to consider the following questions. So why was this technique used? Why not simile? Why not hyperbole? Why this particular one? Why is it suitable here? So why was it used in stanza 1? Why was it used in this particular line? Why is it effective? Link back to what the poem is about. Why is it used at this point in the stanza, and how does it reinforce the meaning that is conveyed? So if you can just go through those different questions, then you're layering your analysis and you're building your analysis. So it's quite sophisticated. So here is an example. So we'll go through the introduction first of all, and then we'll look at the first point. So just a reminder over here of what your introduction should be doing. So here we've got A Child's Sleep by Duffy is a poem about the peaceful, innocent sleep of a child watched over by their mother. So I've given an overview of what the poem is about. I've also immediately used the poem's name and the poet's name. It's clear that the speaker does not want to wake the child, but also does not want to leave as she's enjoying the moment. So I'm further developing my understanding of the poem. The reader is able to see both the awe that the mother feels as well as the idea that the child's sleep is a mystery that she cannot conquer. Now you'll notice that this is one of my points here, mystery. So I'm already giving an overview of where my essay is going to go. The poem is told in the first person, so here I'm talking about form. So I said you could introduce the form here. So just in case I don't have time to talk about it in the essay itself, just in case I forget to come back to it, I'm just going to identify one of the points of form that are easy to talk about and that stands out. So the poem is told in the first person, which makes the emotion conveyed much more powerful and moving for the reader. So notice how I've gone back to the question up here. In addition, the use of the first person helps the reader to experience the moving scene depicted from the perspective of the mother, and just like she is, we also feel alienated from the child's experience as they sleep. So again, I've gone to something that I'm going to explore further on in the poem, which is this idea of being close to the child but also being alienated. So I've gone through all of the different steps here. So the next section is we're just going to go through what I've done with section 1, just so you've got an idea of what else you can do. And I'm going to encourage you to see if you can then do sections 2 and 3. You can either use the plan that I've got here, or you can develop your own plan. Okay, so we have our checklist on the right hand side here. It looks very colour coordinated, and that's just so that you can see how I'm moving through the different assessment objectives. So all the assessment objectives are here in the checklist. So just think about how you're expressing your ideas, which is down here. So how you're expressing it in terms of academic phrasing, words, connectors, but also how you're linking and making transitions. And also think about your AO1, how you are using quotations, how you're showing a good understanding of the poem, and then also how you're talking about your AO2, your methods, how you're explaining those methods for AO3. So Duffy creates a moving experience for the reader. So it's purple here because this whole sentence is a relevant point that shows that I understand what the poem's about, but I'm also directly answering the question, and I've used the key word here. So Duffy creates a moving experience for the reader by presenting the strength of the love from the mother. This is my point. So my entire section here is going to be about the strength of the love from the mother. And what I often encourage my pupils to do is to just keep going back to those key words, strength of the mother. If you need to, write them out again on a piece of paper so you keep looking back at them, and that's what you must keep referring back to. You're proving that you can see the strength of the love from the mother in this poem. So even when you put a quotation, you're explaining it. How does it show the strength of the love from the mother? So this is very important. Not only is signalling direction of this particular section, but also showing that you can stay relevant and you can stay close to your point and make sure that you can pick quotations that reinforce this point. So the next bit is my evidence. Now it's introduced and embedded. So introducing it, where is it from, what's happening, embedding it, putting it into a sentence that flows as part of your own rather than the quotation says. It doesn't. It's not a person. In the poem it says, nope, that's not embedding. So we want to embed it so it flows. So here we've got the strength of the maternal love. So notice how I'm also transitioning. So I'm linking here and transitioning. So to remind the examiner that, yep, my quotation is now going to link to this. The strength of maternal love can be seen in stanza 1. I'm showing you where it is. When the speaker says, I stood at the edge of my child's sleep. Firstly, Duffy uses the metaphor, so I'm naming the technique here, the edge of sleep, to highlight the fact that the child's sleep is a place that the mother cannot enter. So I'm explaining it here and I'm making an interpretation of the particular technique. The choice of the word edge, so I think, okay, well, I can take this further and I can think about why that particular word was chosen. So here we've got this language analysis. Illustrates, so academic phrases here, so you don't want to say shows all the time. Illustrates the liminal position the mother occupies, so she's in between, as she is both a part of the child's life and at the same time a mere observer. So here is my analysis. However, show I'm developing. However, the use of the possessive determiner my, so we've got a technique here, shows that this does not deter the mother. So I'm talking about the language my, and instead the reader is given to understand that she's happy to just be near to the sleep, even though she cannot penetrate it. It could also be argued that by placing both a pronoun and a possessive determiner in the same line, Duffy is emphasising, so showing that we know that Duffy's intended to do this on purpose. She's emphasising the maternal bond that connects both mother and child, and shows how the mother and child are now and will always be inextricably linked. So I've gone back to my own interpretation of what that means. Now, even though I've got a second paragraph here, it's still section 1. So sometimes it can be confusing if you just always think about it in peels. I know teachers, a lot of us, we do talk about them as peels. Rather than think of it as a peel paragraph, maybe think of it as a peel section. Because if you think of it as a pure paragraph, then you tend to want to shove everything into one long paragraph. And as you can see, I'm kind of talking about something different. It's still part of this point, but now I'm moving in a different direction, so I want it to be a different paragraph. But in doing that, you want to show the examiner that you are continuing an idea rather than starting a new one. So I've got this transitional phrase here. So interestingly, Duffy continues the idea of the mother's love and its strength. So going back to my point up here, by describing the image, so we've got technique of the moon in the final stanza. By placing this link to the moon and the greater dark of the outside words in the final stanza, Duffy has presented the mother's love, going back to my point, as something which is continuous. It merely grows in strength through each stanza. So this is me also talking about form. Something as simple as talking about stanzas, you are talking about the form, but you want to say something specific. You don't want to say, oh, there are 3 stanzas, there are 4 stanzas. You want to make a comment that is linked to the poem, linked to the message. So rather than just talk about stanzas, I've said that I think that the stanzas reflect the growing love of the mother. So as the poem progresses, so does the love of the mother. As it grows, we see how the final image depicts the way in which the mother's love matches the expanse outside the window with its power. Furthermore, the moving experience of the poem is increased as the knight gazed back at the speaker, as if both acknowledging her love and reflecting it back towards her. So notice how a lot of these quotations are 1 word, 2 words, and they're very neatly embedded into my sentence. So you don't always have to pick a full line. Just pick whichever part of the quotation you feel that you need. It is in this final stanza of the poem, through the use of personification, so we've gone back to technique, that we realise that the mother is equally protected by the larger mother, the moon. This is my interpretation. So here we're going to focus on writer's intention here, but also, as you can see, we've gone back to the question. Here it's in blue. By ending the poem in this way, it could be argued that Duffy is purposely making a link between the mother and the night sky as a way of showing how natural and eternal this kind of love is. This proves to be extremely moving for the reader, so we've also got effect on the reader here, as we are also forced to see our own position as children of the external world and the maternal moon. So this is just the first section, and you can see how we've developed from the introduction into our Peel section 1. And you can see that I've chosen to talk about 2 quotations in equal detail. You may see that you've got 1 quotation that's in much more detail, and then you've got a second or a third quotation even that's not analysed in as much detail, but it also shows that you've got breadth, so that you've got a range of evidence rather than just focusing on one thing. So here are my final tips for this question. Make sure that your points are clear and you use the language from the question or synonyms. Choose relevant and interesting evidence that you know you can analyse. Name and analyse the techniques that you use. Analyse language choice even if you've commented on a structural or form technique. Link back to the poet's message and intention throughout. Link to the effect on the reader throughout. Use context if it's relevant and appropriate, and try and use academic phrases to help develop your response. So do remember that even though these links in Appeal, they technically come last in the acronym, that doesn't mean that they have to come last in your Peel section. They can be peppered throughout, as I mentioned before. So thank you very much for taking part in this lesson. I really hope that it's helped you in terms of how to approach a poetry question, plan your answer, and then turn that plan into a successful essay. Thank you very much. Goodbye.